Anine Bojo, I'm Sherry Lawson, host of Indigenous Voices. We're still here. My special guest today is Vicki Snache of the Chippewas of Rama. Hi, Vicki.
Hi.
If you could introduce yourself, please, in whatever way you think is proper.
Sure. Anine Bojo, Ginuanango Kwan Dijnakan, Wapsheshi Ndodem, Jikining Donjba, Avding de Kwan Dao. What I said there was my spirit name, Ginuanango Kwan, my clan, that's Wapsheshi, and I'm from Rama in Ojibwe language.
And we've had other people introduce themselves like that. Can you tell us briefly what's a spirit name?
A spirit name, in our culture, one of the beliefs is that we're all given a name before we're even born. So when we decide to come into this life, that's when we have our name with us when we come. And therefore, when people receive a spirit name, it's an acknowledgement of who they are and what their walk is about in the world. So it's very important for our culture for people to have spirit names or to know their spirit name.
And what did your spirit name translate to?
It's Golden Eagle Star Woman.
Holy, that sounds fairly impressive, Vicki. Golden Eagle, right? That's the bird that flies the highest.
Maybe it's because I have my head in the clouds sometimes.
Okay. Let's pretend that our viewers have no idea about anything to do with Indigenous language, culture, history. So what are some of the things that people should know about Indigenous spirituality? Start wherever you want.
Well, if I was to start, I guess I would want to start with respect. So for me, when in my learning, what I've come to understand is that it's important for us all to be able to practice our own belief systems and not tell other people what to do. So if somebody was to maybe go to a different country and experience a culture that they've never experienced before, they would be coming with their own bias. And it's really hard to set that aside because you're grown and raised in a specific way. But what I would want people to do is to just accept that people have different belief systems, and that just because someone has a different way of viewing things doesn't mean that it's wrong. It's just different. So that's what I would want primarily people to understand when it comes to different culture.
And that message perhaps has gotten a little lost over our history in the last 150 years, would you say?
I think that when we believe that it's our way or the highway, there's no growth that takes place, right? But yeah, definitely. I mean, we do have a very dark history, and at the root of all that is a culture that doesn't want to accept that there are differences. So.
All right, and so I have a sister who married someone from the far north, and she said there's still in their communities quite a division between people who believe different things, the traditionalism versus the church system. So do you have anything to say about that?
Yeah, we do have, there are a lot of different ways of doing things. And one thing is to remember that just because somebody's ethnicity doesn't necessarily mean they practice a certain way of life. Like when residential schools and reserve systems were being implemented in this country, there was a strong Christian influence that kind of overpowered everything within Indigenous communities. So there are a lot of Christians in Indigenous communities, and there are also people who practice a traditional lifestyle. Um, it's it's uh, it's not like if I went to, let me think, maybe Jerusalem or something, and would know that, or would be able to make the assumption that most of them practice Judaism. It's not like that in Indigenous country, especially because of the hundreds of years that we weren't allowed to practice our culture. So we're in a time right now where we're allowed to practice our culture. We're allowed to learn our language, and there are a lot of people who are looking back and asking the elders, or trying to find that and reconnect to that. We're at various stages of growth within that right now. So I would say, if you were going to a Native community for the first time, don't make the assumption that people practice a traditional way of life. That's not necessarily true.
Okay, good. Thank you. What can you tell us about your involvement in the language?
Well, let me think here. uh, I've always been really passionate about learning the language. I would call myself a language learner. I went and I took a program at Georgian College a few years ago to try to really learn. And with that, and I became part of my work. Um, so now one of my jobs at work is to revitalize the language. So I'm looking for ways to encourage people to want to learn, looking for ways for people who do want to learn to become fluent.
And how many language keepers are there still in the Rama and community?
Well, it's kind of difficult to say because of well, generational trauma. There are speakers who they know how to speak, but they don't. Um, there are people who understand the language, but they are traumatized from maybe being in Indian day school and being abused, and they won't share it, or they're afraid to. Um, we're lucky in Rama because we do have a few speakers, probably about 5 or 6 who are actively helping to revitalize the language. Um, but to say whether how many actually speak or know the language, that's hard to say, because there are people in the community who do know, but they're not ready to speak.
Okay, thank you. So when you took that course at the college, that sounds like it must be a fairly new course. They didn't have such a thing 10 years ago, right? Do they teach it like I recall being taught French in public school? Open the window, hand me the eraser. Do you have a piece of paper? And we had to memorize those things. Tell us about your experience in taking that program.
So I was really lucky when I went to that program because they had elders there who were raised with the language. So we would call them first speakers. And I could rely on them to learn different words, or when I struggled with different ways of saying things, I could rely on them for that. And then I also had a couple teachers who were second learners, or we would call them second speakers, who learned the language later in life but weren't raised with it. And the interesting part with that was that they were able to break down things grammatically, and decipher, like linguistically, how to create conversation. And I was really lucky to be able to have that, so I could couple it with the first speakers in learning. And it's it was, there were a lot of different programs. So there might be one class that's focused only on nouns, building vocabulary, or one that's focused on verbs and how to conjugate different verbs. So it was really an interesting way to learn. We did try to do immersion for, I can't remember how long. I think it was maybe an hour a week or something like that. And it was difficult, but over time, uh, being able to speak became easier.
Okay. Now, in your work for working for Rama, there's all kinds of things you do in the culture department. Tell us about your involvement with any of the young people in the community or the little wee ones.
So one of the parts, one part of my job is to work with the daycare, the early childhood education center, and the school as well. So um, with the kids, I'll go in, well, not right now because of COVID, but previously I would go into the daycare once a week, and I would only spend 15 minutes with the little ones, but I would try to speak to them only in the language, and share some cultural teachings like smudging, some songs on a drum or shaker. And I'd also assist or support the language class occasionally. Um, and any other teacher that was looking for some kind of cultural or language support within their classroom, as well as every summer for the past, I think it's been 3 years now, we had a language immersion program for young adults, or like teenagers under 17. And that was a week-long program where we would bring different language speakers in to try to create a semi-immersion setting where people who are in high school can have more access to language.
Okay, thank you. You've mentioned smudging, and I just want to throw out there for you that if people don't have an idea of Indigenous life at all, they might have heard about ceremonies, but they don't really understand that. Maybe you can pick one or walk us through that a little bit.
So if I was to meet and spend the day with a Native person who practices a traditional lifestyle for the very first time, and they might have on them a pouch filled with tobacco. And tobacco for us is a sacred medicine, and we use it before doing any kind of ceremony. We use it for asking for something as well. So maybe this person likes to fish, and you go fishing with them for the day. If they practice a traditional lifestyle, they would offer tobacco to those fish before fishing. So that's something that you might encounter, is witnessing the offering of tobacco, which is a way of giving thanks, and creating what I would call a spiritual contract. So when you're asking the fish to feed your family, you're creating contract with those fish. Another thing that you might see is smudging. So The smudging is a way that we cleanse ourselves. Um, Sage is another sacred medicine that we have, and it actually has antibacterial properties in it. So right now is a really good time to smudge because of COVID. But it's also to cleanse our spirit and to focus our mind. Um, Oftentimes in uh, at meetings, even at work that I'll attend, we'll start with a smudge because it's a cultural practice that we've um, been able to carry on, and that's something that is pretty. It's you would see that quite a bit in a Native community.
All right, thank you. I would suppose that with the disruption to our life and our culture and our education, some of these things you might be introducing to people for the first time. Am I right?
Yeah. Some of the work that I do is I've been doing quick little teachings to our own community members about the use of tobacco or things that people can participate in and take on as their own if they wish to. Um, some, like I said earlier, not everybody practices a traditional way of life. And a lot of the education that happens for me, particularly in my position, isn't just with the outside organizations, but it's also within the community itself.
And I understand you've done some work even with staff for the First Nation.
Yeah. So anytime there's a new hire in the community, we do a cultural orientation, talk about the history of our community and some of the culture, some of the things that they might encounter while they're working for Rama. As well, I've done teachings with managers um, on a monthly basis. It might coincide with the moon cycle or some language, just to help people to be more comfortable around these things as we begin to grow in our cultural teaching.
Mm-hmm. Okay, thank you. Now, I spent a lot of time with a grandmother, but half of her time was spent in the church. She was somebody who hid both sides of that from the people who weren't supposed to know that. And she was in her 70s before we realized she knew all these traditional things. She had a little copper vessel and she had it in a very special place. You weren't supposed to play with it. I wasn't supposed to give my dolls tea out of it. What can you tell us about a copper vessel and a woman?
Well, in our teachings, and nowadays it's I'm going to say it anyway, but
Go
in our
ahead.
teaching, we have roles for women and we have roles for men. With that said, um, we we also have a special place for those who are um, may identify in a different way. But many of the teachings that we have focus on that. If you really look at the heart of ceremony or culture, depending on what it is, men are the ones to look after the fire, and women are the ones to look after the water. So as a woman, uh, it's our um, it's our responsibility to take care of that, and we do that mostly when we do ceremony with water. It's it's done using a copper cup, and the copper is it's it it's really interesting if you look into that just the properties of copper and what it does for water. Um, it helps to clean that water. And therefore, if you ever see or are able to participate in water ceremony, that's what you'll see. You'll see copper being used.
Now, we've heard in the news in the last few years, especially since Truth and Reconciliation, the idea of water walkers, women who have taken that responsibility very seriously. Can you give us more information on that?
Yeah. So I was able to meet with some water walkers a couple times, and it's pretty incredible what they're doing. Um, they're walking along the shorelines of the lakes for the water, and praying for that water and cleaning as they go. Um, there have been studies where if where a test might be done on the water, and then after the water is prayed for, the water is actually cleaner. So what these water walkers are doing is not only raising awareness of the importance of looking after the water, but also they're, by the act of having ceremony every day, all day with that walk, they're cleaning that water as well.
So, what you've mentioned there, that the water is actually better or purer or clearer or has less bad stuff in it, are those science people who've said that?
Well, there is one scientist that kind of talks about that in the same way that we view it, which would be a Dr. Emoto. Yeah.
Oh, okay. I just thought that people might think, well, that's nice to say that you pray for the water, but how will we ever know if it's better than it was before? So it's nice to know that somebody with maybe some initials behind his name who is seriously into water has said, yeah, you're right. You're making the water better. Vicki, I know that we've had a rough history as First Nations people for a long time, and it seems that we're starting to pick up things again that have been lost. What do you see in the future?
It's funny. I often go back and forth on this idea of the future. I ultimately I believe that we're in a good place, and that we have a really good chance at maintaining our culture, at learning the culture more, becoming stronger as a nation, as well as our language. But I also feel like we're living in a time where we are racing against time to make sure that that is a reality. And we've lost so many speakers all over. And once they're gone, we won't have language. We'll only have what we have in books or what someone may have recorded. But although that is true, there are also handfuls of people, pockets of people all over North America who are really trying. They're speaking to their children in the language. They're trying to pass on these traditions so that our grandchildren can continue to know what it means to be Anishinaabe or Indigenous. So ultimately, I have faith in a positive outcome if we continue what we're doing.
I had I heard an elder say one time that it's really hard to get the children to understand what we're trying to teach them. They've got tablets and they got phones and they got video games and they have TikTok and all this stuff to entertain them. Do you know if there's anybody working in some of those mediums trying to hold on to this language and culture?
Yes, there's a lot available online, and like be it apps or a video game even was recently created. I can't remember um, who it was that made that, um, but there is a big shift to moving online. And even now with COVID, there's so much access to cultural teachings, to language learning through Zoom, and it's really it's quite amazing. Where just I think it was last week I listened to a Zoom about tobacco, and if we didn't have if we weren't living in the situation that we are right now, I may not have been able to attend that because I would have had to drive to the States, right? So, so it is pretty incredible how things have been moving toward a more
It,
technology.
it sounds as well that some of the language keepers, maybe some of them who don't even speak English, and some of the elders are embracing this technology to try and teach, right? And that's fairly new.
It is, yeah, yeah. I'm still trying to teach
Okay.
my dad, but I don't know.
Okay. You're a mother of three, am I right, Vicki?
Yes, yeah.
And were your parents fluent in the language?
No, my dad's actually he's non-native, and my mom is she was raised by fluent speakers, my grandma and grandpa, but she never learned the language growing up. Later
Okay.
in life, she tried to learn, but
Okay. You would think that since you're in the language is important to you, maybe you grew up with that, but that's interesting that not everybody did, not everybody's the same. Vicki, I want to thank you so much for joining us today on Indigenous Voices. We're still here. And I think people will have learned a lot from you today. Chimigwech.
thank you.